As we move into the hands-on development phase of this course, I think it's important to have a more comprehensive understanding about what multimedia learning objects really are and how they can be reused or integrated logically into other systems. You may not realize this, but there's actually an ontology, which is a structural hierarchy that is followed in the professional development industry, and this helps ensure consistency across various learning platforms. It wasn't always this seamless, but the evolution of modern e-learning standards has contributed substantially to the current levels of interoperability that we now enjoy. And the most obvious manifestation of that is all of the incredible authoring tools that are now available to us. So with that said, let's start with a definition. A multimedia learning object is a combination of a variety of different elements. But the important thing to understand here is that we're talking about raw material, we're talking about raw text, we're talking about graphics and shapes and photos and videos and narrations and sounds that are fresh out of the capture utility, whatever it is you use to get them into the machine. So we start with this raw material, just the same way a carpenter would start building a house. You get the lumber, you start cutting, you start assembling things, you put them together. And that's exactly what we do in the multimedia learning object development process. A critical attribute of multimedia learning object design is reusability. This is really, really important to understand. What we're trying to do with multimedia learning objects is to follow this principle of modular design. And that's an old object-oriented programming term, but it's very, very practical for what we want to do. There's a concept that we're going to talk about in a little bit called granularity, which simply refers to the scope of development, the scale of development. And if we start really small, when we start assembling these different elements into these learning objects, if we design them well, they're going to fit into other systems and platforms, learning management systems, content management systems. This is the way we can scale up these designs so that we get additional utility out of them. It's not just one and done. We develop a PDF. Okay, great. We publish it on our learning management system. Can it be used for anything else? Well, because it's in PDF format, or maybe we saved it as an HTML document, we can obviously link to it from other resources where it might be practical or it might relate to the content. So we have to always design for reusability in mind. Now, the other part of this is compatibility. I mentioned PDF and I mentioned HTML. In addition to that, there are other standards that are really, really important. MP4, which you know is a video standard, and MP3, which is an audio standard. Combined, the four of these, especially HTML5, we now have these well-honored sets of standards in the industry that allow tool makers and allow platform developers to create these resources that we as instructional developers can use and feel very confident that what we make in one environment is going to transfer, ingest, or implement accurately in the other one. This is so important. And there's a little bit of advanced tech involved in the HTML5 types of objects that we might create. It's called a wrapper, or sometimes called a manifest file. And it's a little beyond the scope of what we're doing in here, but just so you understand what the term means, it's a suite of documents. It's a set of additional text-based documents that define a variety of different things that allow these objects to be reused. It's essentially structural metadata, and it allows that PowerPoint presentation or that video that you created or that PDF that you created, it allows that to be ingested properly by some type of any type of learning management system and display accurately and interact accurately with the other elements within that particular platform. So again, the whole key here is interoperability that's leveraged because of all these different file compatibility standards that have been or have evolved over time. There is an ontology to multimedia learning objects. And what I mean by that is that there is this hierarchic classification schema. And learning objects are really just one part of this overall model. We begin, of course, with elements. That's the lowest common denominator. That is the most granular thing that we can manipulate as developers. I can't call it an object because that's also on this continuum. So we start with elements. That's the raw material we talked about earlier. When we combine those elements together, we make assets. And this is the language that professional developers use. So elements combine to make assets, typically graphics and some descriptive text. We edit those. Suddenly it becomes an asset. We take a video, a raw video out of the camera, we do some trims, make some edits, suddenly it's an asset. When we combine those edited assets together, we create a learning object. And that's obviously the goal of this course the goals of this course are built around the development of learning objects, multimedia learning objects. So we're kind of in the middle of this classification ontology. But it gets higher than that, and it's important that you understand the flow here. A combination of learning objects forms a lesson. And one key distinction between a learning object and a lesson is that typically a lesson involves some form of assessment. And what happens when you combine a bunch of lessons? Well, then you have an instructional module. If you have a combination of modules, then that becomes a course. And this combination of modules and also you typically has some advanced interactions associated with it. So this is the classification schema, the ontology that includes learning objects. So again, multimedia learning objects are somewhere here in the middle. Here are some of the standards that I mentioned earlier. These are e-learning standards that are responsible largely for promoting so much tool and platform development. We also have some web content standards. AICC, SCORM, and Tin Can, these are historically, I guess, in linear order. Aviation industry was one of the first major industries to standardize this process so that they could train pilots. SCORM stands for Shareable Content Object Referencing Model. You don't have to know that, just know that a lot of the instructional content that you get from your digital content providers is SCORM compliant. And the newest iteration of that is called Tin Can, and we're still, I guess, at the front end of the implementation phase of the Tin Can standard. But all of these are really doing the same thing. They're defining how the content gets packaged, how the data gets exchanged with whatever platform is hosting it, and then often there's some type of navigational user interface that's bundled with it. So this collection of files wraps up whatever the learning object resources are and bundles them in a way that they can be understood and ingested accurately by these learning management systems and content management systems that provide additional learning resources and functionalities for instructors. And HTML5 and MP4, of course, are wonderful web standards, web content standards that have greatly expedited the development of all these amazing tools and platforms that we get to use. And speaking of which, let's take a look. I'm going to present these tools categorically. We'll start with asset and object development, so we're going to start at the lower end of our development ontology, and we're going to get a little bit more complex as we go. Clearly Microsoft Office and all of its productivity applications that we so well know could be classified as a fantastic development or authoring tool. Adobe Creative Cloud, certainly an industry standard for a variety of different applications, especially Photoshop and Premiere. There are also some higher end applications from Adobe that I'll mention here shortly. For developing audio, of course, we have Audacity. On the Mac side, it would be GarageBand. Animations, there are lots of different animation apps out there. Many of these are fairly available to teachers and other budget-minded educators. Powtoon is another fantastic one. Go Animate. These are three very similar apps that do some amazing productivity functionality, especially for teachers, anybody on a budget, because these can be done over as a web app. Some of them have downloadable mobile apps as well. Smart Notebooks, certainly we could consider the content that we develop for our smart boards to be a learning asset or a learning object. And Camtasia Studio, this is a pro tool that is easy enough for prosumers or just everyman to use. And that's wonderful. And we're going to use Camtasia Studio in here in this course. You'll download the temporary version of that, the demo version of that, in a little while. Don't do it now because we need those trial memberships to last. Another new authoring tool on the scene here is Adobe Slate, which allows you to create HTML5 compliant content, and it scales responsibly to lots of different devices. It basically is a web application that allows you to develop interactive slideshows with multimedia content, very sophisticated, very impressive. And the Microsoft equivalent of that, this is new, is called Sway. And there's also the Office Mix, which is an add-in for PowerPoint. So it's not a web app, even though it produces web output. Sway and Slate are both web apps, whereas Office Mix is actually a plugin that works with PowerPoint. It gets downloaded and installed on your desktop. So these are all relatively new authoring tools that have some additional output capabilities, and we'll look at some of these as we progress through this course. The next category that's worth, I guess, qualifying is lesson or module development. So we're going to move up in complexity in our ontology continuum. And so the tools that we tend to see developers using to create multimedia lessons and multimedia modules can include Adobe Captivate. This is another professional tool, amazing responsive development tool, can design for any platform, highly interactive, many advanced interaction capabilities in there. It also has the capability to build assessments directly within your learning objects. So that's why they're in the lesson and module category. And it also leverages the ability to sequence your learning objects. So it's not just a self-contained learning object, it's actually a combination of learning objects in a targeted sequence based on whatever content it is that you're trying to teach. Very, very sophisticated program. We teach it in our EDS program, but we do not teach it currently in the MAD program. If you want to be intrepid and try this for your final project in this course, I absolutely would encourage you to do so. It's more complex than Camtasia, but it's the capabilities are just incredible. Another tool that professionals use is called Articulate Storyline. Kind of gets clipped up here. You can't really see Articulate, but this too is another desktop authoring application with tremendous interactive capabilities and assessment capabilities and multimedia interaction capabilities. Just an incredible tool. So Articulate and Captivate pretty much dominate this market right now for professionals that are trying to design interactive lessons and modules. And you could really even say that these can also create self-contained online courses. But they fit neatly in this category here, so I place them there for now. Apple has its own lesson and module development category. It's called iBooks Author. They've had this for quite a while. It's very rich. It allows you to integrate all sorts of media elements. It allows you to bundle some limited assessments, and it does have some limited interactions that it can use. It's primarily linking, but there are some interactions. Nowhere near as sophisticated as Captivate or Articulate Storyline, but still a great tool, especially if you are a Mac fan and love using Apple products. Now, course development obviously means more than just deploying or publishing instructional content. It's really about creating a learning hub that allows you as the instructor to manage a variety of different instructional and learning tasks, such as enrollment, scheduling, content management, grading, analytics, reporting, social media interactions, conferencing with your students, etc. There's a whole gamut of functionalities that are layered on top of actual multimedia development that are part of this. And so really, it's at the highest end of our ontology here. You've created these multimedia learning objects, you sequence them, and now you want to add some of these extra features. And so these objects need to be ingested into these learning management system platforms, such as Moodle, which is obviously what we use here at school. It's an open source product. Its commercial corollary is, of course, Blackboard. Very expensive, extremely capable. Sometimes I wish we still had it. Canvas is a newer platform on the scene. It gets a lot of good press. It started as an open source project, the code, but it has a really, really good user base of, or developer base. It adapts and improves constantly. It's very impressive. I took a course in it last summer, primarily just to kind of experience the platform, and I gotta say it put at least our implementation of Moodle to shame. So nevertheless, those are the big three, but there are others. Google Classroom, of course, relatively new, obviously extremely accessible, and definitely targeting the teacher education market. Many of you use Google Classroom, that I know. Here's something that's really interesting. Adobe, which dominates the professional development market with Articulate, in other words, their Adobe Captivate product, and obviously the other product was Articulate Storyline, but Adobe recognizes that, hey, if we're really going to dominate this market, we need to close the loop here. We need to be a complete turnkey environment. So we've got this magnificent authoring tool called Captivate, and now we want to add a learning management system to it. So what are we going to call it? Well, we're going to steal a page out of Amazon's notebook and we're going to call it Prime. Now, I think the name is kind of cheesy myself, but I got to tell you, I've looked at the actual platform in previews, and it's very, very impressive. Now, it's priced completely out of our reach right now, but that may change. Rumor has it they are going to target public education and especially higher education. So Moodle, Blackboard, and Canvas, get ready. There's another player coming into town, so it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this evolves over the next couple of years. Anyhow, those are some examples of course development tools, what we would typically call course management systems or learning management systems. There are a whole host of professional corporate versions of those that are priced way out of our budget. But given that most of us in this program are educators, these tools here are the ones that we just reviewed are enough to at least help us understand what this category really is. So that's our broad overview of multimedia learning objects. I really hope that this information provides some useful context to the many upcoming design and development decisions you're going to have to make in this course. I suppose I would say that this is the fun part of the course because it's where we get to experience a lot of different authoring tools hands-on, and we get to build a variety of different learning objects. So we have that to look forward to. And with that said, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you online.